I thought I'd lost everything when my husband died. Our home, our dignity, our future. Standing outside that luxury hotel, begging for scraps, I never imagined the man in the expensive suit, watching from the shadows, would change my life forever. Sometimes karma comes in the most unexpected form. If you believe in second chances and karmic justice, hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible real-life stories that prove the universe has a way of balancing the scales. My name is Sarah, and 6 months ago, I had what most people would call a normal life. Nothing fancy, mind you, but comfortable. My husband Mark and I lived in a modest 3-bedroom house with a white picket fence that he'd painted himself every spring. He owned a small landscaping business, and while we weren't wealthy, we never went to bed hungry. We had Sunday dinners with his sister's family, took weekend drives to the lake, and talked about maybe taking that trip to Europe we'd been dreaming about for 20 years. Mark was the kind of man who'd give you the shirt off his back. He'd see a neighbor struggling with their yard work and show up the next morning with his tools, refusing any payment. "We're all just trying to get by, Sarah," he'd tell me, dirt under his fingernails and sweat on his brow. A little kindness doesn't cost anything. I used to tease him about being too generous for his own good. I had no idea how prophetic those words would become. The heart attack came without warning on a Tuesday morning in March. One moment, Mark was drinking his coffee and reading the paper, laughing at some comic strip. And the next moment he was on the kitchen floor, clutching his chest. The paramedics worked on him for 43 minutes. I counted every single one of them, standing in that sterile hospital hallway, praying to anyone who would listen. But sometimes prayers aren't enough. The funeral was beautiful. Half the town showed up because Mark had touched so many lives with his quiet generosity. People shared stories I'd never heard. How he'd plowed their driveways for free during bad winters. How he'd hired their teenage sons for summer work when no one else would give them a chance. I sat in that front pew, surrounded by love and support, thinking I was blessed to have been married to such a good man. I thought the hardest part was behind me. I was so very wrong. The bills started arriving 2 weeks after the funeral. Not just the medical expenses from his final hospital stay, though those were crushing enough. No, these were business debts I never knew existed. Suppliers, equipment loans, back taxes. Mark had been quietly drowning financially for months, maybe years, and he'd hidden it all to protect me from worry. My gentle, generous husband had been carrying this burden alone, probably hoping he could work his way out of it without me ever knowing. The house that had been our sanctuary for 15 years was gone within 3 months. Everything we owned was sold to pay creditors. The antique dining set Mark had surprised me with for our 10th anniversary, the piano I'd learned to play as a child. Even my wedding ring had to go toward the medical bills. I found myself standing in an empty house that no longer belonged to me, holding 2 suitcases and wondering how a life could disappear so completely. Pride is a luxury you can't afford when you're homeless. I tried staying with Mark's sister at first, but her husband made it clear I wasn't welcome long-term. "We've got our own problems," he'd mutter whenever I was in earshot. I lasted 3 weeks before the tension became unbearable. After that, it was my old Honda Civic and whatever kindness I could find from day to day. I applied for every job I could think of, but at 45 with no recent work experience, I wasn't exactly a hot commodity. The few interviews I managed to get always ended the same way. They'd promised to call, and then they never did. My savings, what little Mark hadn't known about hidden in an old coffee can, lasted exactly 6 weeks. After that, it was food banks when I could find them, and trying to make myself invisible in parking lots where I wouldn't be hassled for sleeping in my car. You know what's funny about rock bottom? You think you've hit it, and then the ground gives way beneath you again. I'd been homeless for 2 months when my car broke down. The mechanic said it would cost more to fix than the car was worth, and I couldn't afford either option anyway. That night, sitting on a bench outside the auto shop with everything I owned in 2 garbage bags beside me. I finally understood what true desperation felt like. That's how I ended up outside the Grand Imperial Hotel on that cold Thursday morning in October, holding a piece of cardboard that simply read, "Anything helps, God bless." I'd walked 12 blocks from the shelter where I'd spent the night, and my feet were blistered in shoes that were falling apart. The Grand Imperial was the kind of place I used to dream about staying someday, all gleaming marble and gold fixtures, with a doorman in a uniform that probably cost more than I used to spend on groceries in a month. I wasn't asking for much. Maybe someone going in or out would have $1 to spare, or at the very least, might direct me towards somewhere I could get a hot meal. I positioned myself carefully, not blocking the entrance, not being aggressive, just quietly hoping for a small miracle. I'd been there maybe 10 minutes when I noticed him. The doorman with his perfectly pressed uniform and polished brass buttons, striding toward me with the kind of expression that said I was something unpleasant he needed to scrape off his shoe. "Ma'am, you can't be here," he said, and his voice had all the warmth of a January morning. His name tag read Marcus, and he was young, maybe in his 20s, with the kind of arrogance that comes from a little bit of authority and not much wisdom to go with it. "This is a high-class establishment. You're making our guests uncomfortable." I looked around at the empty sidewalk and the few people hurrying past without so much as glancing in my direction. "I'm not bothering anyone," I said quietly, my voice hoarse from the cold. "I'm just hoping someone might help me get something to eat. I'll move along if you really need me to, but I'm not causing any trouble." That's when Marcus decided to make a show of it. "Security," he called out, loud enough that people across the street turned to look. "We've got a vagrant situation here." He was enjoying this, I realized with a sick feeling in my stomach. This was probably the most important he'd felt all week. The security guard who came trotting out was a big man with a permanent scowl and the kind of swagger that suggested he'd been waiting all day for an excuse to flex his muscles. "What seems to be the problem?" he asked Marcus, but he was staring at me like I was something dangerous that needed to be contained. "This woman is loitering and panhandling," Marcus announced, puffing up his chest. "Our guests expect a certain standard when they stay here. We can't have people like this cluttering up the entrance." People like this. Those words hit me harder than a physical slap. People like this, as if poverty was contagious, as if bad luck was a choice I'd made. "Please," I said, hating how small my voice sounded. "I'm not causing any problems. I just—" "Save it." The security guard cut me off. His name tag read Rodriguez, and he had the dead eyes of someone who'd stopped seeing people as individuals a long time ago. "You move along now, or we call the police and let them sort it out. Trust me, lady, you don't want that kind of trouble." By now, a small crowd had gathered. Hotel guests and passers-by who'd stopped to watch the spectacle. Some looked uncomfortable, a few seemed sympathetic, but most just stared with the kind of morbid curiosity people have for car accidents. I felt my cheeks burning with shame, but I tried one more time to appeal to whatever humanity these men might have left. "I understand this is a nice hotel," I said, my hands shaking as I held my pathetic sign. "I'm not asking to come inside or bother your guests. I just lost my husband, and I lost our home, and I'm trying to get back on my feet. If you could just let me stand here for a little while." That's when the hotel manager decided to make her grand entrance. Patricia Whitmore was a thin woman in her 50s, with perfectly styled gray hair and the kind of cold, pinched face that suggested she'd never experienced a moment of uncertainty in her privileged life. She swept out of the hotel like she was making an entrance at the opera, her heels clicking against the marble steps with the rhythm of a metronome. "What is this commotion?" she demanded, looking at me with the same expression most people reserve for something they've scraped off their shoe. "Marcus, Rodriguez, explain yourselves immediately. We're handling a vagrant situation, Ms. Whitmore," Rodriguez said, straightening up like a soldier reporting to his commanding officer. This woman was panhandling on hotel property despite being asked to leave. Patricia's eyes narrowed as she looked me up and down, taking in my worn clothes, my cardboard sign, my obvious desperation. And then she smiled, the coldest, cruelest smile I'd ever seen. "I see," she said, and her voice dripped with disdain. "And you felt the need to create a public spectacle rather than simply removing this person from the premises." She stepped closer to me, close enough that I could smell her expensive perfume and see the diamond studs in her ears that probably cost more than most people make in a year. "Let me make something very clear to you," she said, her voice low but carrying clearly to everyone watching. "This is the Grand Imperial Hotel. Our guests pay premium prices for a premium experience. And that experience does not include being accosted by homeless beggars the moment they step outside." The words hit me like physical blows, but I forced myself to stand straighter, to meet her cold gaze with what dignity I had left. "I wasn't accosting anyone," I said quietly. "I was just hoping for a little kindness." Patricia laughed, actually laughed, and the sound was like breaking glass. "Kindness," she repeated, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Honey, kindness is a luxury, and you clearly can't afford any of our luxuries. Marcus, call the police. I want this woman arrested for trespassing and harassment." "That's not necessary," I said quickly, picking up my cardboard sign and my small bag of belongings. "I'll leave. You've made your point." But Patricia wasn't done humiliating me yet. "Oh, I don't think you understand the severity of the situation," she said, her voice getting louder, more theatrical. By now, the crowd of onlookers had grown, and she was clearly enjoying her audience. "You people think you can just show up anywhere and make your problems everyone else's responsibility. Well, not here, not at my hotel." She turned to address the crowd, spreading her arms wide like she was giving a speech. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this unsightly display. At the Grand Imperial, we pride ourselves on maintaining the highest standards, and that means keeping the riffraff where it belongs, in the gutter." The crowd was uncomfortable now, shifting their feet and looking away, but Patricia was on a roll. She turned back to me with gleaming eyes. "You want to know what real kindness would be? Real kindness would be you getting a job instead of bothering hardworking people for handouts. Real kindness would be you cleaning yourself up and contributing to society instead of being a burden on it." Every word was designed to cut, to humiliate, to reduce me to something less than human in front of all these strangers. I felt tears burning behind my eyes, but I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing me break down completely. Instead, I gathered my things and started walking away, my legs shaking with exhaustion and shame. "And don't come back," Patricia called after me, her voice carrying down the street. "The next time I see you anywhere near this hotel, I'll have you arrested faster than you can blink." I kept walking, one foot in front of the other, trying to shut out the laughter and comments from the crowd she'd turned against me. My face was burning with humiliation. My heart was pounding with a mixture of anger and despair, and I felt smaller than I'd ever felt in my entire life. This was what I'd become, a spectacle for cruel people to mock, a problem to be solved by moving me somewhere else, where I wouldn't offend anyone's delicate sensibilities. What I didn't know, what none of us knew, was that someone had been watching the entire scene from the penthouse window 30 floors above. Richard Blackwood, the billionaire owner of the Grand Imperial Hotel, and about 24 others around the world, had been standing at his window with a cup of coffee, conducting what he called his ground truth evaluations, watching how his staff treated people when they thought no one important was looking. Richard had built his fortune from nothing, starting with a food truck in Detroit and working his way up to a hospitality empire worth billions. But he'd never forgotten what it felt like to be desperate, to be dismissed, to be treated like you didn't matter because you didn't have money or status. He'd been watching Patricia Whitmore for months, suspecting she was exactly the kind of manager who looked good on paper but had no soul. Now he had all the confirmation he needed. I'd made it about 2 blocks from the hotel before I had to stop and sit down on a bus bench. My legs were shaking too badly to carry me any further, and the adrenaline from the confrontation was wearing off, leaving me feeling hollow and defeated. I sat there staring at my cardboard sign, thinking about Mark and wondering what he would say if he could see what had become of his wife. That's when a shadow fell across me, and I looked up to see a man in an expensive suit standing nearby. He was older, maybe in his 60s, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He didn't have the polished, artificial look of the hotel staff. His suit was expensive, but lived in. His face had character lines that suggested he'd actually experienced life, rather than just observed it from a distance. "Excuse me," he said, and his voice was gentle, respectful. "I saw what happened back there at the hotel. I'm sorry you were treated so poorly. I was wondering, would you let me buy you lunch? There's a diner just around the corner that makes excellent soup." I stared at him suspiciously. After what had just happened, kindness from a stranger felt too good to be true. "Why?" I asked bluntly. "What do you want?" He smiled, and it was a real smile, the kind that reaches your eyes. "Nothing," he said simply. "Sometimes people just need to know that not everyone in the world is cruel. My name is Richard, and I'd like to buy you a meal, if you'll let me." Something in his voice, his manner, told me he was genuine. And honestly, I was too tired and too hungry to maintain my guard. "Sarah," I said, standing up on unsteady legs. "And yes, I could use something to eat." The diner was one of those old-fashioned places with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that could wake the dead. Richard, he insisted I call him by his first name, ordered us both the daily special and coffee, treating the waitress with the same courtesy he'd shown me. We sat across from each other in a corner booth, and for the first time in months, I felt like a human being again, instead of a problem to be solved. "Tell me about yourself," Richard said, once the waitress had brought our coffee. "How did you end up outside that hotel today?" So I told him everything. About Mark and his hidden debts, about losing our house, about the long slide from middle-class respectability to homeless desperation. Richard listened without interrupting, without judging, occasionally asking gentle questions that showed he was really hearing me. When I got to the part about my husband's generosity, about how he'd helped neighbors without expecting anything in return, Richard nodded like he understood completely. "Your husband sounds like a remarkable man," Richard said when I'd finished my story. "The kind of person the world needs more of. I'm sorry for your loss, and I'm sorry for what you've been through since." "Thank you," I said, and I meant it. It had been so long since someone had spoken to me like I mattered, like my pain was valid and my struggle was real. "You didn't have to buy me lunch or listen to my problems. Most people cross the street when they see someone like me coming." Richard's expression grew serious. "People like you?" he repeated. "You mean people who've faced tragedy and hardship? People who've fallen on tough times through no fault of their own? People who are trying to survive with dignity in a world that's forgotten how to show compassion?" His words brought tears to my eyes. "I used to be respectable," I whispered. "I used to matter." "You still matter," Richard said firmly. "Your circumstances have changed, but your worth as a human being hasn't." The people at that hotel, they've forgotten that fundamental truth. They've forgotten that we're all just one tragedy away from needing help ourselves. We talked for over an hour. Richard told me about his own struggles, growing up poor in Detroit, about the people who'd helped him along the way, about building his business on the principle that how you treat people when they can't do anything for you reveals who you really are. He was easy to talk to, and for a brief moment, I almost felt like my old self again. When it was time to leave, Richard walked me outside and handed me an envelope. "There's enough in here for a decent hotel room for a few nights and some meals," he said. "But more importantly, I want you to have this." He handed me a business card. "Call that number tomorrow morning and ask for Jennifer. Tell her Richard sent you. She'll help you get back on your feet properly." I looked at the card through my tears. It was for a high-end employment agency. "I don't understand," I said. "Why are you doing this? You don't even know me." Richard smiled that genuine smile again. Sometimes we're put in each other's paths for a reason, he said. Your husband believed in treating people with kindness. I'd like to think he'd approve of someone showing that same kindness to his wife when she needs it most. That night, for the first time in months, I slept in a real bed with clean sheets and took a hot shower that lasted as long as I wanted. I cried. For Mark, for everything we'd lost, for the kindness of a stranger who'd restored my faith in human decency. I had no idea that my life was about to change in ways I couldn't imagine. The next morning, I called Jennifer at the employment agency. She was professional but warm, and when I mentioned Richard's name, her entire demeanor shifted. Mr. Blackwood called me personally about you, she said. He wants us to find you something meaningful, something that uses your skills and treats you with the respect you deserve. Can you come in this afternoon, Mr. Blackwood? Something about that name tickled at my memory, but I couldn't place it. I spent the morning at the library, using their computers to research the employment agency and prepare for the meeting. That's when I saw it, a business article about hospitality mogul Richard Blackwood, owner of luxury hotel chains around the world. The photo showed a familiar face with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. The man who'd bought me lunch, who'd listened to my story, and treated me with dignity, was a billionaire. More than that, according to the article, he was the owner of the Grand Imperial Hotel, the very place where I'd been humiliated and degraded just 24 hours earlier. My hands shook as I read about his business philosophy, his commitment to customer service, his reputation for being hands-on with his properties. He'd been there, at his own hotel, when Patricia Whitmore and her staff had treated me like garbage. He'd seen everything, heard every cruel word, witnessed every moment of my public humiliation. The meeting with Jennifer went well. Better than well. She had several positions available, but there was one she kept coming back to. It's a bit unconventional, she said, but Mr. Blackwood was very specific. He's looking for someone to fill a new position, Director of Guest Relations for the Grand Imperial Hotel. Someone who understands what it means to treat people with dignity, regardless of their circumstances. I stared at her in disbelief. The Grand Imperial. But there was an incident there yesterday. I was asked to leave. Jennifer's smile was knowing. Yes, she said simply. Mr. Blackwood is well aware of that incident. In fact, it's exactly why he wants you for this position. He believes that someone who's experienced how it feels to be treated poorly is the perfect person to ensure it never happens to anyone else. The next morning, I walked into the Grand Imperial Hotel, wearing a professional suit that Jennifer had helped me select, carrying a briefcase containing my new employment contract, and feeling more nervous than I'd felt in my entire life. The doorman, not Marcus, I noticed, opened the door with a smile and a polite greeting. Everything looked exactly the same as it had 2 days earlier, but my perspective had changed completely. Richard was waiting for me in the lobby, impeccably dressed, and with that same kind smile I remembered. Sarah, he said, shaking my hand warmly. Welcome to your new workplace. Ready to meet your team, my team. The words still felt surreal. Mr. Blackwood, I began. I don't know how to thank you. By doing the job better than it's ever been done before, he said simply. By making sure that every person who walks through these doors, regardless of who they are or what their circumstances might be, is treated with the dignity and respect that every human being deserves. He led me toward the hotel restaurant, where he'd arranged for the staff meeting that would change everything. There's just one small matter to address first, he said, and something in his tone made me look at him more carefully. It seems we have some staffing changes to announce. The restaurant had been closed to guests for the morning meeting. Most of the hotel staff was there. Housekeepers, front desk clerks, maintenance workers, restaurant servers. And there, sitting at a table near the front, were Patricia Whitmore, Marcus, and Rodriguez, all looking confident and completely unaware that their world was about to turn upside down. Richard walked to the front of the room with me beside him, and the conversations gradually died down as people realized the meeting was beginning. Patricia looked at me with obvious confusion and growing alarm. She clearly recognized me, but couldn't figure out what I was doing there in professional attire, standing next to a man she didn't recognize. "Good morning, everyone," Richard began, his voice carrying easily through the room. "For those who don't know me, my name is Richard Blackwood, and I own this hotel, along with several others in our chain." The color drained from Patricia's face so quickly I thought she might faint. Marcus and Rodriguez looked like they wanted to disappear through the floor. Suddenly, everyone in the room understood that the man they'd never seen before was actually their ultimate boss, and he'd been watching. "I'm here today because of an incident that occurred outside this hotel 2 days ago," Richard continued, his voice still pleasant, but with an edge of steel underneath. "An incident that revealed some fundamental problems with how certain members of our team understand their responsibilities to the community we serve." He gestured for me to step forward. "I'd like you all to meet Sarah Mitchell, your new Director of Guest Relations. Sarah will be implementing new policies to ensure that every interaction our guests and the general public have with our staff reflects the values this hotel was built on: compassion, dignity, and respect for all people." Patricia finally found her voice. "Sir, there seems to be some mistake," she said, her voice shaking. "This woman was trespassing on hotel property 2 days ago. She's homeless. She was panhandling. She was asking for help." Richard cut her off, his voice now sharp as a blade. "She was a human being in distress, seeking a small kindness from her fellow human beings. And instead of receiving that kindness, she was humiliated, mocked, and threatened with arrest by staff members who forgot that our success as a business means nothing if we fail as human beings." The room was dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the carpet. Richard's presence filled the space, and his disappointment was palpable. "Patricia Whitmore, Marcus Thompson, and Carlos Rodriguez," he continued, "you are terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the premises. Your final paychecks will be mailed to your addresses on file." Patricia shot to her feet, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "You can't do this. I've worked here for 8 years. I've increased profits every quarter. You can't fire me because of some homeless woman." "I can fire you because you failed to represent the values of this company," Richard said calmly. "Because when you had the opportunity to show compassion to someone in need, you chose cruelty instead. Because you turned a human being's pain into public entertainment. And because you've shown me that you lack the basic decency required to work for this organization." He turned to address the rest of the staff. "Let this be clear to everyone here. How you treat people when they can't do anything for you is the true measure of your character." Mrs. Mitchell experienced the worst of what this hotel had to offer 2 days ago. Today begins her mission to ensure that never happens again. Patricia was escorted out still protesting. Marcus looked like he was going to be sick, and Rodriguez just hung his head in shame. The rest of the staff watched in stunned silence as their former colleagues were walked to the door, their careers ended by their own cruelty. After they were gone, Richard turned back to the remaining staff with a different energy, still serious but more hopeful. "Now," he said, "let's talk about how we're going to do better. Mrs. Mitchell has some ideas that I think you'll find interesting." Over the next hour, I outlined my vision for the hotel's guest relations. We would train staff to recognize and assist people in distress. We would partner with local shelters and social services. We would make the Grand Imperial a place where people were valued for their humanity, not judged by their circumstances. The staff listened intently, asking thoughtful questions, and I could see many of them were genuinely excited about the changes. That was 6 months ago. Today, the Grand Imperial Hotel is not just a place where wealthy people stay when they visit the city. It's become a beacon of compassion in the community. We have a program where local job seekers can use our business center for interviews. We donate leftover food from events to homeless shelters. Our staff is trained to recognize signs of domestic abuse, mental health crises, and human trafficking. And they know how to connect people with appropriate resources. And me, I have my own office with a window overlooking the street, where I once sat with a cardboard sign. I have a comfortable apartment just 10 blocks away. I have meaningful work that honors Mark's memory by helping others the way he always did. I have my dignity back, and more importantly, I have a purpose. Sometimes I think about Patricia, Marcus, and Rodriguez. I heard through the grapevine that Patricia struggled to find another management position. Word gets around in the hospitality industry, and her reputation preceded her. Marcus ended up working at a discount retail store, and Rodriguez took a job with a private security company. I don't take pleasure in their struggles, but I hope they learned something from the experience. I hope they understand now that the way you treat people matters, that your actions have consequences, and that karma has a way of evening the scales. But mostly, I think about the guests who stay at our hotel now. Families celebrating anniversaries, business travelers far from home, young couples on their honeymoons. They all receive the kind of service that comes from staff who understand that hospitality isn't just about thread counts and turn-down service. It's about treating every human being like they matter. Just last week, I was walking through the lobby when I saw one of our housekeepers, Maria, talking quietly with a young woman who was clearly upset. The woman was well-dressed but crying, and Maria had stopped her cart to offer tissues and ask if she could help. It turned out the guest had just received news that her father was in the hospital, and she was trying to figure out how to get home to be with him. Within an hour, Maria had helped her contact our concierge service, rearranged her travel plans, and even packed a care package from our kitchen staff for the journey. That's the Grand Imperial Hotel now. That's the legacy of that terrible morning when I was humiliated on the sidewalk and a billionaire was watching from his window. Richard Blackwood could have simply fired the staff who treated me poorly and moved on. Instead, he chose to build something better, to create a culture where kindness isn't just encouraged, it's expected. You know what Mark used to say about people? He'd say, "Sarah, everyone you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. Be kind. Always be kind." Patricia Whitmore and her colleagues forgot that fundamental truth, and it cost them everything. But their loss became a gain for everyone else who walks through our doors, everyone who works alongside me, everyone who believes that a little kindness can change the world. I still keep that cardboard sign in my desk drawer, not as a reminder of my lowest moment, but as a reminder of how quickly things can change when the right person is watching. Sometimes the universe puts us exactly where we need to be, even when it doesn't feel like it at the time. My husband was right about kindness coming back to you. He just never could have imagined it would come in the form of a billionaire hotel owner with a heart for justice and the power to make things right. Every morning when I walk into the Grand Imperial Hotel, I think about the morning when I stood outside its doors as an unwelcome stranger, and I'm reminded that our lowest moments don't define us. How we rise from them does. Mark always believed that treating people with dignity was simply the right thing to do, regardless of whether anyone was watching. He was right, but what he didn't know is that someone is always watching. Karma doesn't forget, justice doesn't sleep, and sometimes redemption comes from the most unexpected places. If this story moved you, if you believe that kindness matters and that how we treat each other defines who we are, please hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible stories of hope, redemption, and second chances. Share this with someone who needs to remember that even in our darkest moments, the universe has a way of balancing the scales. And tell me in the comments, what moment of unexpected kindness changed your life? Because those stories matter too, and they remind us all that we have the power to be someone else's miracle just by choosing compassion over cruelty. Remember, you never know who's watching. You never know whose life you might change with a single act of kindness. And you never know when the universe might be preparing to reward your compassion in ways you never imagined. Thank you for listening to my story, and thank you for believing that tomorrow can be better than today.